All right, let's talk about one of the biggest mysteries out there. Back in July of 1947, something crashed in the New Mexico desert. The military's first reaction? They called it a flying saucer. But then, almost overnight, they totally flipped the script. So today, we're going to dig into what might have actually gone down using the incredible investigation from the book Crash at Corona as our roadmap.
And right here, this is where the whole thing just splits wide open. First, you get this absolutely bombshell headline, straight from the Army's own press release. RAF captures flying saucer. I mean, can you even imagine? But then, not even 24 hours later, they're holding a press conference saying, whoops, never mind, it's just a weather balloon. A flying saucer or a weather balloon? It's like, which one is it? A history-making event or just a really embarrassing mix-up?
So let's really zero in on that official story for a second. It's the summer of '47, and the Roswell Army Airfield tells the world they've got their hands on a flying disc. Naturally, the news goes absolutely insane. But just as fast as it started, the story gets shut down, completely squashed by an official retraction.
Okay, so this is the guy, General Roger Ramey, who had to sell this news story. He gets in front of the cameras, holds up some debris, and says it's just a regular old weather balloon. You know, tin foils, some rubber, a few sticks. The message couldn't have been clearer. Move along, folks. Nothing to see here. But here's the thing. For the people who actually touched that wreckage with their own hands, that explanation, it just didn't fly. Not even close.
And that really gets to the heart of the problem, right? This is the one question that just refused to die. See, the guy who first checked out the crash site for the military, he wasn't some newbie. This was Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer for the 509th Bomb Group. We're talking about the only atomic bombing unit on the entire planet at that time. These guys were the best of the best. And his version of events? Well, it was a whole different story.
So for about 30 years, that was it. The weather balloon story stuck. Roswell became this kind of weird little footnote in history books. But then, in the late 1970s, everything changed. Investigators started tracking down the original witnesses, people who were there on the ground. And after decades of silence, they were finally ready to talk.
And here he is, Major Jesse Marcel himself, the main intelligence officer who gathered up all that stuff from the desert. Even decades later, he never, ever changed his story. As a guy who knew aircraft inside and out, he was absolutely certain about what he saw. He famously said it was not of this earth.
And the stuff Marcel described, it was just bizarre. He and his son both handled it. They talked about this foil-like metal. You could wad it up into a ball, and it would just smooth itself out, completely flat, with no creases. Then there were these I-beams that were as light as balsa wood, but you couldn't break them, you couldn't burn them, you couldn't even scratch them. And maybe the weirdest part? They had these strange pink and purple symbols running all over them, like some kind of hieroglyphics nobody had ever seen before.
Then you've got the story of Mac Brazel, the rancher who found all this stuff in the first place. His story is just as weird. So he finds this huge field of debris and does the right thing. He reports it. But as soon as the military shows up, they basically take him away. He's held in custody for almost a week, and when he finally gets out, his story has completely changed. Suddenly it's a weather balloon. Oh, and he also has enough money to buy a brand new truck, and he pretty much never, ever talks about what he found again. Sounds suspicious, right?
Now, if you think weird metal is where this story ends, you are in for a surprise, because that was just the tip of the iceberg. As more and more witnesses came forward over the years, the story took a much darker, much more shocking turn. We're not just talking about a cover-up of some strange wreckage anymore, we're talking about bodies, and the absolutely extreme measures the government supposedly took to keep everyone quiet. I mean, you have to ask yourself, if this was just a weather balloon, or heck, even some top-secret spy plane, why the intense lockdown? Why the threats? The stories from these witnesses point to something way bigger than just a few pieces of metal. And the threats were not vague. They were personal, and they were terrifying. Just listen to this. This is from the granddaughter of the sheriff at the time, George Wilcox. She says the military police came to her grandparents and told them flat out, if you ever breathe a word of this, it's not just you we'll kill your entire family.
And Sheriff Wilcox wasn't some lone voice in the wilderness. Nope. Several different people who didn't even know each other started telling similar stories about seeing bodies. And the descriptions were always weirdly the same. Small, non-human beings with big heads. The story from Glenn Dennis, who was a mortician in Roswell, is maybe the most chilling of all. He said the military base called him asking about small, hermetically sealed caskets.
And when he got to the hospital to see what was up, military police literally threatened him and told him to forget he ever saw anything.
Okay, so if you're going to pull off a cover-up this massive, you can't just wing it. You need a serious, top-level organization. Well, according to some very controversial documents that were leaked years later, that's exactly what happened. President Truman himself supposedly created a super-secret group called Majestic 12. Their one and only job? To handle the Roswell crash, the technology, and most importantly, control the secret. And when you look at who was supposedly in this group, I mean, it's a who's who of the most powerful people in America at the time. We're talking the first ever Secretary of Defense, the first director of the CIA, the top generals, the top scientists, the big guns. So if any of this is real, it tells you one thing. This wasn't some little cover-up happening in New Mexico. This secret was being managed at the absolute highest levels of the US government.
Which, of course, brings us to the biggest question of all. Let's just say for a minute that any of this is true. Why? Why keep a secret like this for so long? Why would the cover-up still be going on more than 75 years later? What could possibly be worth all that trouble?
Well, the theory laid out in Crash at Corona is that the truth would be just too much, too big, too world-shattering for us to handle. Think about it. What would happen to religion, to our science, when we find out our technology is centuries behind? What happens to global politics when every country realizes their armies are useless? And maybe biggest of all, what happens to us, psychologically, when we find out we're not at the top of the food chain? The book argues that the people in charge decided the risk of total chaos was just too high.
And in the end, the whole Roswell story leaves us with a question that's even bigger than, are we alone? It's a question about power and about secrecy. Does a government have the right to keep a truth this big from everyone? So whether you think it was a balloon or a spaceship from another world, the one thing you can't deny is the mystery. And it makes you wonder, if they could keep this a secret, what else don't we know?